All right, in this video, what we're going to do is introduce you to a new tool, a very powerful tool. It's an application called Reflector. It was written in .NET, and what it allows you to do is peek into assemblies, other applications written in .NET. Basically, it allows you to disassemble and sift through the source code that was used to create those assemblies. Very, very powerful application. We're going to be able to use this to look through the Microsoft XNA framework, and we can start showing you how all of the pieces start to hook up. So very nice stuff. Logan's going to show you where you can get it from.
All right. Well, the Reflector application is found on the website aisto.com.
Okay.
This is a website that houses LUT's Rotor's applications. As a matter of fact, that's the first and only link on the site. If we jump into the LUT's Rotor page on the site, we see we have a software development section that contains a programming.NET section. This is the one we want because it contains Reflector. So we'll jump into this section, and here we have a link and description for the Reflector application itself. And below that, we have a link to download the application. If we click on that link, we're presented with a form and a download button. The fields in the form do have to be filled up before the download button will work, but it's quick to do, and as a matter of fact, we have already done that. And I've downloaded the reflector.zip file to a folder on our C drive. We have this CCS folder that we've been using as a temp working folder. Inside of this folder, we have the downloaded reflector.zip, and I also have the Knowledge Review 7 project folder in place because I'm going to use Knowledge Review 7 to demonstrate the use of Reflector. Now, once you've downloaded Reflector, the setup is very simple. Since it's a zip file, all I'm going to do is extract it to a Reflector folder. And if we jump into that folder, we have the Reflector application itself. So at this point, we can go ahead and run it. When we do, since this is the first time that we've run Reflector, we'll be presented with a list of assemblies for it to use as its default assembly list. And as you can see here, we have a few versions of the .NET Framework installed. The one I want to use for default is the newest version of the .NET Framework 2.0 that we have. That's the one that's currently selected. So I'll hit OK to that, and we have a few assemblies loaded in. Now, to demonstrate the things that can be done inside of Reflector, I want to load in an additional assembly. If I jump back up, of course, we have this project folder for Knowledge Review 7. Inside of that, we can continue jumping folder by folder until we finally find the bin and debug folder where we have this executable, our Knowledge Review 7 executable, which is the assembly for Knowledge Review 7. This is what I want to peek into in order to see what it contains. And just for support, so we have something to compare it against, I have the Knowledge Review 7 project loaded in Visual Studio, so we can compare things back and forth between Visual Studio and Reflector. So jumping back to Reflector now, I want to go ahead and maximize Reflector so we have more screen space to work with. And now I want to load in that Knowledge Review 7 assembly. So I'll hit Open, and we've currently defaulted to the Reflector folder. If I jump up a level, now we're under the Working folder, and I can begin navigating into Knowledge Review 7. Of course, we need to go into the Project folder, which contains the bin folder, the debug folder, and that has our executable, our assembly. With that assembly selected, I'll hit Open. And now we see the assembly listed in our assemblies list. From there, we can expand it. Now we see knr7dag executable. That contains some references and a namespace, knr7.dag. Inside of that, if we expand the namespace, we can see all of the classes housed within that namespace. This is similar to Visual Studio, where if you switch from the Solution Explorer, or even look at the Solution Explorer that has all the classes, but to get something that looks a little bit closer, we could switch to the class view. And if you look up at the namespace, there we have a bunch of classes, much like we do now in Reflector. Now, one of the first things you can do with these classes is expand any one of them and look at look at members that they contain. The node class contains a constructor, a toString method, and a name property and a name field. We can compare this to Visual Studio. If I open up the node class, you can see that we have the name field, the name property, and the overridden toString method. Now what we can do is investigate one of the more powerful features of Reflector, and that is the ability to disassemble actual methods and see the code that is contained within them. To demonstrate this, what I want to do is I would like to take the program class and find the while loop that's housed within it without having to use Visual Studio.
So yeah, go ahead and, actually I'll just do this. Scroll up over here. Just as a reminder, this is inside our entry point in the application. It's in the main method. So we're going to be looking for the main method inside the program class and that's where we should find this while.
All right. Now let's see what would be necessary to do that if all we had was that executable. Well, we have it loaded in Reflector. We're looking at the classes. One of those classes is program, so I could expand the program class. And if we look inside of that, as you were just saying a second ago, there we have the main method. We can see that it's a method, but we don't see any code yet. That's because we have to tell Reflector to disassemble this code in order to show it. And there's a few ways we can do that. One way is to right-click and click on disassemble. Another way is to hit spacebar with any method selected. Now, with the main method disassembled, a pane will appear on the right, and that will show the disassembled IL code. And it's currently displaying the IL code as C#. There's actually a few choices. We could choose to show it as Visual Basic if we wished. But since we're focusing on C#, I'm going to leave it set to C# for the default disassembler. And now looking through this method, we can see that we have our while loop, among other things. Now, of course, it doesn't look exactly the same. We are missing white space. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense, since white space is more of an idea that exists inside of C# instead of in IL, which is what this code has been decompiled from. But that has indeed met our requirement of finding code within an assembly and showing that code back to us in C#.
This is really handy because, I mean, you can just come in here and just start browsing through so many things. You know, okay, so we have an empty constructor, but we have a process. Well, what does process do? Oh, well, let's see. It takes in a string array, blah, 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 blah. Now it's very handy because you'll notice that everything in here is linked. So if I wanted to say a transform node, well, let's go to the transform node type. Here we are, the definition for a transform node, which inherits from node. All right, so information. Notice that this is all of our fields right here, and then we have all of our methods, but we haven't actually looked at it. It's just basically definition for the methods, but if we come down here and expand the methods.
That's another good thing to point out is if you want a view that looks more like the original CS file, the original class, clicking on the entire thing where you have transform node selected and are disassembling the entire transform node, that showed the fields and all of the methods instead of viewing things method by method.
Right.
So it's just an alternate way of looking at a class.
And then here we are, of course, inside looking at all of that code that we typed in the past. So very useful stuff. That's something that you're going to find that I like to do often. It's just like node. All right, well, let's jump over to node real quick. Okay, so class node, and it contains its name. And okay, very good. Very handy stuff when you just want to start traveling around from one thing to another. Let's go ahead and show them real quick how they can analyze as well.
Well, this is very useful when you're trying to map out better, or try to better map out what a method is used for and who uses it. Let's pick on the process method of the group command. If I right-click on it and analyze, then we get yet another pane loaded, which will analyze that method, and this gives us two things we can look at. It gives us a list of things that it depends on, so it's apparently depending on some functionality in the MS Core Lib, as well as some things inside of Knowledge Review 7, things like the node, the transform node, and then methods housed within that. Now, even more interesting is the fact that we can tell who accesses this method, who is it used by. If we expand use by, we can see that the process method is actually called by the command manager, and more specifically the process command method.
Which is
and
correct.
This is also linked, so if we wish, we could, it's a, I thought it was linked. It's
no, but you can get to
it
it quickly by right-clicking on it, though. So if you want to go to it and go to member.
We do have go to member functionality where we can jump to the process command, and here's a disassembly of process. And if we look in, we should be able to find command.process.
Yep.
So you can see that this is where the link is actually occurring from.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually able to trace that back through a loop that was referring to the command in a list.
Yeah. So, and as you continue to come over here on the right-hand side and analyze, let's go and analyze one more thing for them, Logan, like maybe the light node or something. I mean, just pick something to analyze, and let's just show. What I want to show is how in the analyzer it's just going to continue stacking these things.
Let's look at transform node and look at its, let's see, how about its public show tree method?
All right, so let's right-click analyze, and you'll see that it just simply gets added over there to the analyzer.
Right, it's not actually clearing the analyzer. We still have the line from the command group process method, but to that now we have added an analyze for the the transform node show tree, which we can expand. We can see what things use show tree. And at the moment, only the ls command is using show tree.
Right. So very handy stuff. Now let's go ahead and close up our knowledge review. Let's get these Microsoft assemblies in there, at least the 2 key ones. So let's go ahead and open the folder back up. I think you've got it actually down over here. We've got it opened up from the last video where we were talking about all of the different assemblies that make up the framework. But now we finally have a means of peeking inside and seeing what type of things exist. Are these types that we've said exist within these assemblies? Are they really there? Well, let's find out.
Just to make the navigation a little bit easier, instead of navigating these folders one by one, I'm simply going to copy this entire path out of the Windows Explorer and paste that into the Open dialog in Reflector. So if I go to Open now, instead of navigating, I can paste the path in, and there we've magically jumped to the assemblies.
So now instead of pulling in both of these, what we can do to begin with is let's just pull in one, like the game DLL. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you have an assembly that depends on another assembly, but you don't have the other assembly loaded, that's going to give you a little bit of grief, but it will allow you to load that assembly if you have it. So let's demonstrate that first.
Okay.
Because obviously the game DLL is going to rely on some things that come from the framework.
Right. Surely there's going to be some base types that were defined in framework.
Right. So we'll pull in just the one, and it's not going to give you grief yet. Just go ahead and click OK.
No, it's perfectly happy to open the assembly.
But the problem is when we start to disassemble. So let's climb down in there. So far, so good.
All right, let's see what namespaces are available. And that is, I was expecting more. I think it's
no, it's just the frame.
Yeah,
just
we're
the framework.
looking at the framework namespace.
Now, if we jump down into, so there's game. What do you know? Let's go into game. Oh, so far, so good. Now let's climb into some of the game methods. Let's assemble them on the right.
Let's grab any one of these.
So far, so good. The problem's going to come in at the moment we jump into anything in there that uses something that's defined over in the other assembly.
And to increase the chances of that, I'm going to do an expand methods to view all of the methods at the same time.
And boom, there you go. That way we didn't have to just keep hunting around. So right now we obviously need, as you can see here, the Microsoft.xna.framework DLL. And we happen to be pointing right to it, so go ahead and click OK, which will load that assembly in.
And I can prove that by scrolling down, and we can see we have yet another assembly loaded, Microsoft.xna.framework.
Very good. So now we have all of the types available to us that need to be there in order for us to disassemble. So all is good.
Now, there was a skip button on that dialog, so that means if you don't have that assembly, you're still not completely out of luck.
That's right.
You can attempt to skip, and chances are you'll still be able to see something, in many cases even a lot of code. You just might not have the ability to trace into some of those types if you don't have the assembly for those types.
Exactly. So if we were to come over here and open up the XNA framework and then jump down into the assembly, a lot of the different namespaces that we talked about in the last video. We talked about how we had the framework itself, and we had audio content, and there's some things that we haven't talked about. Well, we've got design, graphics.packed vector, input, storage. So if we were to come over here and just jump into the XNA framework and open this up, inside this namespace, you're going to find some things that are going to look a little familiar to you, like vector 2, point. We've got rectangle in here somewhere. There it is, rectangle. So a bunch of different things. How about, what if we did this? Something else we pointed out in the last video, we talked about inside the Microsoft.xna.framework.game DLL that its namespace was just framework, so it put it in the same namespace as this one right here. We can see that all the way back up here.
If we take note of the namespace is simply Microsoft.xna.framework.
Exactly.
So any classes will be added to that framework instead of making yet a new one.
And then here's a whole bunch of very important things that we're going to be talking about. Some of these in the very next video that's going to be coming up. We've got game, the game clock, game time, there's a game window, all different puzzle pieces for an XNA game. So if you were to come into game and open up game, we can take a look at this constructor. What happens when you actually create a game? And we can simply come over here and we can see, a game time is created. There's a whole bunch of different things. And we're going to talk about some of these things in the next video. The clock gets created. Very nice. So let's go ahead. Let me think. Is there anything else we want to show here? Just keep in mind, analyzing is really big, and being able to come in and right-click. Again, we can just jump back. I got an idea. With game itself, something that might be important. How about host? Go ahead and if we wanted to take host and just track this through, go ahead and right-click on that for me, Logan.
Sure.
And analyze it.
We do an analyze.
And then we can go ahead and climb down and use by. And then we can see, oh, it's used by several things. Host gets used over inside of ensure host. Well, gee, what's inside there? Go ahead and right-click on that and go to member. And now inside ensure host, oh, so this is where the host actually gets assigned to a new Windows game host. And this is where we begin the path for the construction of a window, which we'll talk in more detail. We'll talk about in more detail in the next video. So again, make sure, right-click, analyze. Who uses it? Very important stuff, and it really helps clue you in quickly as to who's creating something or who's utilizing something and why when you're dealing with a really large assembly, like we are here inside all of these framework assemblies. Logan, is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Nothing comes to mind.
All right. Very good stuff, and we're going to use it heavily in the next video. So with that, that is going to wrap up this video on Reflector. Thanks a lot.